Hi Soma. As part of this year of authentic community in the world, we're doing a community mixtape series, and this is the second, Too Much Gravity Keeps Us From Flying. I want to talk about humour in the Christian life and in community. I started thinking about humour many years ago and realised that laughing together helps us feel close to one another. Like when we play with our children, they feel so close to us, and a couple that plays together stays together. And so really humour helps build community. And also humour helps express and understand the hope and the joy that we have in Jesus. And there's an incredible amount of humour in the scriptures, from the punning of the Adam and Eve story to the witty yet uncouth repartee of Samson, who says, "With the jawbone of an ass, I have piled them in a mass," describing what he'd done to the Philistines, to the biting sarcasm of the prophets, right through to Jesus, who said amazing things like, "You strain out gnats, but swallow camels." And so there's just so much humour in the scriptures. Some is lost in translation, but there's so much of it. Stanley Handelman, a stand-up Jewish comedian, said, "Gravity is the force that pulls all things to the centre. It's what keeps us from flying. It's the opposite of levity, which is the force that raises things and makes them light. Religion is supposed to free the spirit from gravity, raise it, lighten our loads, and enlighten our minds." And in these two talks, this week and next week, I want to talk about levity, what can make us fly. With the darker side of life, sin and suffering and death, there coexists a lighter side, laughter, humour, and playfulness. And I want to talk about the lighter side without forgetting the heavier side, which is important too. But too much gravity keeps us from flying. So let's look at levity, laughter, and lightness in the scriptures, and let's get a balance between gravity and levity in our lives. So this talk will cover God and laughter, what is laughter, and the place of laughter in our lives. And the place to start is Abraham and Sarah. Their laughing is the first laughing mentioned in the Bible in Genesis 17 to 21. Next week I'm going to look at other examples through the scriptures, but this is the place that it starts, Abraham and Sarah. Well, the first laughter happens when God appears to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17. Sarah and Abraham have not been able to have children. And God says to Abraham in verse 15, "As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And then in verse 19, God says, "Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac." And far from getting angry at Abraham for laughing, God tells him that when the baby is born, they are to call him Isaac. Isaac is Hebrew for have a giggle or laughter. I want you to call him laughter. So God doesn't just tolerate Abraham's laughter, he blesses it. And in a sense joins in with it himself, which makes it very special laughter indeed. God and man laughing together, sharing a glorious joke in which both are involved. The second laughter is Sarah in Genesis 18. Abraham is sitting in the doorway of his tent, enjoying the much needed shade of the tent and also the afternoon breeze. Suddenly 3 men turn up, and later we find out that they're angels. Abraham immediately invites them to sit and asks Sarah to prepare a meal for them. As the meal draws to a close, one of the men asks, verse 9, "Where is your wife Sarah?" At that moment, Sarah is hiding behind a tent flap, listening to the conversation. Perhaps knowing this, the angel says, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." When Sarah hears this, she laughs. Verse 11, Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. She's almost 90. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? And then what happens next is fascinating. The angel asks Abraham, verse 13, why did Sarah laugh? Sarah is scared stiff and she denies the whole thing. And the angel says, yes, you did laugh, and then reaffirms that all things are possible with God. What's going on here? I think the angel is having a bit of fun with Sarah. It's a bit of playful banter. Some commentators read this as a rebuke of Sarah for laughing. I don't think that fits the context. When the angel says, yes, you did laugh, this is God again highlighting that this baby who will be born will bring laughter. He'll bring a lot of joy, and surprising and astonishing things will follow. That's the theme that's developing. This child will bring laughter. And then in the third laughter, chapter 21, laughter is born. And Sarah is holding laughter in her arms, and the whole town is sharing Sarah's joy and laughing with her. And Sarah says, chapter 21, verse 6, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she adds, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So back in chapter 18, when the angel asked Sarah why she laughed, I don't think the angel is rebuking Sarah for laughing. The angel is just reinforcing this whole theme that Isaac will bring laughter and joy to the family. And Sarah and Abraham's laughter in chapter 17 and chapter 18 is a herald of the greater laughter that will come through Isaac and through his descendant, Jesus, who is the ultimate child who will be born and bring joy to the world. See, how do you view God? Is God the kind of God who rebukes a 90-year-old woman for laughing when she's told she's going to have a baby? I don't think so. See, how do you picture this angel as he talks to Sarah in chapter 18? I think his eyes are Mediterranean blue and brimming with something of which the laughter of Abraham and Sarah is a mere inkling. The mirth of God himself, his sense of humour. And here we see that the history of Israel begins with laughter, a laughter that comes from God himself. And God now has a humorous title, the God of Abraham, laughter, and Jacob, which is repeated throughout the Old Testament. God is the father of laughter, or the giver of laughter. Israel is the son of laughter because Isaac's son will be Jacob, who's renamed Israel, and out of him the 12 tribes of Israel will come. So Israel is born out of laughter. Laughter, therefore, is central to Israel's life with God. This is why there is so much humour in the Bible. And Isaac himself, his name is a constant reminder of this. All right, secondly, why are Sarah and Abraham laughing, and why should we? Why are they laughing in chapter 17 and 18? A quick answer, and we'll go through this more slowly in a minute. They're laughing at the idea of a baby being born to geriatrics. They're laughing because the angel not only seems to believe it, but seems to expect them to believe it too. They're laughing because with a part of themselves they do believe it, but they're laughing because with another part of themselves they know they'd be crazy to believe it. And they're laughing because laughing is better than crying, and maybe not that different. And they're laughing at God and with God, and they're laughing at themselves too, because laughing has that in common with weeping. No matter what the immediate occasion is of either our laughing or our weeping, in the end, our laughter becomes about ourselves and our own lives, or our weeping is about ourselves and our own lives. So Abraham and Sarah are laughing for many reasons. Laughter is like that. Let's go through this a little bit more thoroughly. Why did they laugh, and why should we? We need to be careful explaining humour, of course, because humour tends to die in the process of dissection. Like a joke, it's no longer funny if you have to explain it. But there are three aspects to Sarah and Abraham's laughter, and by extension ours. Firstly, surprise. There's an element of surprise. The last thing they expected was this news that they're given. It takes them by surprise as much as it takes us. She'll be 90 on her next birthday, and the angel says she's going to celebrate it in the maternity ward. Sarah stuffs her apron to her mouth. Abraham gasps for air. It's such surprising news. This is why the timing of jokes is so important. The punchline is funny, partly because it's so out of the blue. Comedian Woody Allen is a master at surprising us. In the nightclub years, he tells us his parents' values are God and carpeting. And in Take the Money and Run, his mother-in-law has a conversation with God about salvation and interior decorating. And it's the surprise of the second part that is part of the humour. And certainly an aspect of Abraham and Sarah's laughter is that this news was so unexpected. Secondly, refreshment. Laughter wells up in their throats like sorrow, but it's not sorrow. It contorts their faces like tears, but it's not tears, or it's a different kind of tears. What is the relationship between laughter and tears? Laughter in many ways looks like tears. Laughter has many levels, so do tears. If we talk about Sarah and Abraham's laughter, we also ought to talk about Jesus when he wept. When Jesus wept over the body of Lazarus, if you know the story, many things seem to have been happening. And there seemed to have been many levels to his grief. He wept because his friend was dead and he loved him. He wept because, as Mary and Martha both tactlessly reminded him, if only he'd been present, Lazarus need not have died. On a deeper level, he wept because if only God had been present, then again, Lazarus need not have died. And God wasn't present, at least not in the way or to the degree that he was needed. On a deeper level still, Jesus wept for the whole world and the tragedy of the human condition. A world where again and again God is not present, at least not in the way or to the degree that we need him. Jesus shed his tears at the audible silence of God, at those moments particularly when a word from God would mean the difference between life and death. Jesus wept, we all weep, because God makes himself scarce, or seems to, for reasons nobody can fully explain. If that's where the weeping comes from, where does laughter? It comes from as deep a place as tears come from. And in a way, it comes from the same place. As much as tears do, laughter comes out of the darkness of our world. A world where God is of all missing persons the most missed. I'm sure the long childless years had taken their toll on Abraham and Sarah. I'm sure the news had been so bad for so long that they'd all but given up hope. perhaps Sarah has given up hope. So when the angel appears and tells them the baby is coming, it's like rain breaking suddenly and unexpectedly after a long and painful drought. And their laughter had as much to do with how long they'd been waiting and what they'd been through as a couple as with how good the news was. The tragedy of their situation meant that the good, when it finally came, was so unexpected, so unforeseen, so glad and so astonishing that all they could do was laugh. Christian author Frederick Buechner says, humour has to do with unforeseeable good breaking in on tragedy and despair. Comedy often has this aspect of surprising good when tragedy seemed inevitable. How can Donald Duck foresee that after being run over by a steamroller, he'll pick himself up at the other side, as flat as a pancake for a few seconds, but alive and squawking? How can Charlie Chaplin, in his baggy pants and derby hat, foresee that though he's been stood up by the girl and clobbered over the head by the policeman and hit in the face with a custard pie, he will emerge dapper and gallant at the end, twirling his invincible cane and twitching his invincible moustache? To weep at tragedy, as Jesus wept, is to weep at the inevitable. Tragedy is bound to happen, given the vulnerability of people and the pitiless storm of our lives. As Job says, man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. And there's inevitability in the tears that we shed. And they're part of what it means to be human. But the announcement of the angel is just the reverse of that. They're going to have a baby after all. It's just what was bound not to happen. It's just what was not inevitable. The strangers who appeared at their door turned out to be angels. Who could have possibly predicted it? Who could have possibly made it happen? Grabbed an angel out of the sky and got the angel to give such astonishing news. What could they do but laugh at the preposterousness of this great news? And they laughed until the tears ran down their cheeks. The third aspect of their laughter is that hope surged through. 5 quick points. The root of the English word humour is from the Latin humor, meaning liquid or fluid, because humour is something that courses through us. Mark Twain said, it shakes up the details of our anatomy from head to foot. So it's something that kind of moves through us, surges through us. Secondly, the American Heritage Dictionary says a sense of humour involves a capacity to appreciate or understand. So humour is something that courses through us, bringing a fresh appreciation and understanding. Ha-ha is akin to aha. It has to do with new insight, a new way of seeing things, a fresh perspective. Thirdly, humour and hope are related. Where there is humour, there is hope, and where there is hope, there is humour, said Conrad Hayes. Humour involves a deep insight that the tragedies of life don't need to defeat us. Ultimate victory over the powers that seem insurmountable is possible. God can and will do impossible things when we least expect it. Jesus' resurrection is the ultimate example of this. And that's the understanding that now surges through Abraham and Sarah. A new hope. A new hope. And fourthly, this new perspective is not the usual way of seeing things. This new hope is seeing life, particularly tragedy, from a very different angle to the norm. in his book, In the Presence of Humour, Christian author Robert Benchley says that when he was a university student, he had to answer an exam question about the dispute between Britain and America over fishing rights in international waters. Students had to discuss the issues from the point of view of the two countries. Benchley wrote, "I know nothing about the point of view of Great Britain and nothing about the point of view of the United States. Therefore, I shall discuss this question from the point of view of the fish." I wonder what marks he got for that. And he says, humour is like the fish perspective, seeing things from an odd or unusual or unexpected perspective. Inherent in this fish perspective is hope. All good humour has a seed of hope. Seeing things from a different point of view that is full of hope. Even poo jokes that 11-year-old boys are fond of. In those jokes, if you think about it, there's an inkling of the hope of the resurrection of the body. Bear with me here. But author Peter Berger says, by laughing at the imprisonment of the human spirit, humour implies that the imprisonment isn't final but will be overcome. Applied to poo jokes, the imprisonment of poo is not final, if we could say. This is the fish perspective, a delightful, hopeful, enticing, subversive perspective that works its way through our body from tip to toe, over and over and over again, as we hear the good news of God. J.W. Wedby, in his book The Bible and the Comic Vision, says, "The comic eye can stare directly into the face of death and still see the surging powers of life and laughter." So humour is a fresh, new fish perspective. Fifthly, humour relativises tragedy and in the end restores God to centre stage. The fish perspective often involves seeing things from God's perspective. God's perspective is that tragedy is not what is inevitable. What is inevitable is that God will do the unforeseen and impossible. He will get the last laugh. Jesus' resurrection from the dead is God's ultimate last laugh. God can and will do the impossible. So when Sarah and Abraham hear the angel's news, their laughter is the dawning realization that although what the angel says is too good to be true, who knows, maybe the truth is always better than we think it is. Maybe the truth of it is that this news is too good not to be true, given who God is. This insight stays with Abraham, so that in the very next chapter, chapter 22 of Genesis, Isaac, after he's born, God tells Abraham to sacrifice him. And Abraham corroborates, we're told, because he now expects the unexpected. He understands God's sense of humour and timing, if you will. Hebrews 11 says, "By faith, Abraham, when tested by God, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, 'It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned.' Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead." In other words, Abraham begins to believe in the hilarious unexpectedness of the things God does and ignore tragic expectedness. And Romans 4 verse 24 says that Abraham's faith is a model for us who believe in a God who raised Jesus from the dead. Because if God raised Jesus from the dead, God can do the impossible. He can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. So why did Sarah and Abraham laugh, and why should we? Their laughter isn't cynical, it isn't empty, it isn't hysterical, it isn't false. No, it's a response to God and this good news that he brings. And there are at least three aspects. Surprise. They laughed because God surprised them. Refreshment. They laughed because things had been so bad so long and their problems seemed so insurmountable. And their laughter was a release of all that tension that had built up over all those painful years. And the good news was just this refreshing, beautiful water for them to jump into. And when the miracle happens and Isaac is born, Sarah laughs and Abraham with her and the whole community too, because having used up all their tears, all they had left was laughter. But the laughter was sweeter because of the tears. Thirdly, hope. They laugh because hope surges through them. A new expectancy, a new and delightfully subversive way of seeing life and understanding God. That he is the God of surprise and refreshment. Suddenly it dawned on them that the wildest dreams they'd ever had hadn't been half wild enough, given who God is. I said earlier that I imagine the angel's eyes are like Mediterranean blue and brimming with something of which the laughter of Abraham and Sarah is a mere inkling. The mirth of God himself, his joy, his sense of humour. That's the fish perspective, a new angle on or insight into God himself and therefore life. So they laugh, and laughter becomes a part of their ongoing life. And we will learn to laugh too as we experience this same God. Laughter in the end is a response to God and to the gospel. It's part of our faith in God. Blessed are you who get the joke, who understand that Jesus Christ rose from the dead and God is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. And in our gospel communities and in our life together as a church, we need to learn to look for the hilarious unexpectedness of the things God does and ignore tragic expectedness. And we need to learn to laugh with God, and there'll be tears, yes, but not so many. And there'll be gravity, yes, but there'll also be levity, laughter, and lightness. Well, more on what this means next week. Amen.